Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, why did Primož Roglič get a 20-second penalty at La Vuelta, and was it justified? I'll be looking back at the incident and giving my own opinion on it. I'll also wrap up the second week of that race and look back at the Renewi Tour, in which Lotto Dstny looked like a team that was not particularly cohesive. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that substitutions are now a thing in professional bike racing. That was Little Turns making his professional debut. We also learnt that UAE Team Emirates had a more unwelcome podium guest at their team sign-on at La Vuelta. And finally, we learnt that Primož Roglič is a little further from the lead of La Vuelta than he'd have hoped at the end of the second week of racing. Ben O'Connor crossed the line at the end of stage 15, and as he did so, it looked as though his lead was down to just 43 seconds. But in the subsequent race communique, it was revealed that the UCI had given Roglič a 20-second penalty. Why? For drafting behind his team car, having changed his bike ahead of the summit finish. Nothing abnormal about that, it happens all the time, right? But this was a little different. So firstly, Roglič didn't change his bike due to any kind of problem with it. He changed it because he wanted a different bike with different gear ratio for the steep final climb. So it was his own choice rather than through necessity. Secondly, he drafted behind his own team car, which for some strange reason is often frowned upon more than if you draft behind the vehicle of another team. I should probably read the rule. According to UCI Rule 4.7 of Article 2.12.007, sheltering behind or taking advantage of the slipstream of a vehicle in a World Tour stage race can result in a 200 Swiss franc fine, a 20% penalty in the points and mountains classification, and a time penalty of between 20 seconds and 5 minutes. So in this instance, Roglič, along with teammates Adria and Martinez, received a 200 Swiss franc fine. They were docked 15 points in the UCI classification, 4 points in the mountains and sprint at the Vuelta, and most importantly for Roglič, he was given a 20-second penalty, which is the minimum penalty in this instance. Now, this can be very confusing because, as I said before, we see this happen blatantly all the time in road races. So what's the difference here? Well, the reason that a blind eye is normally turned is because a rider is returning from a mechanical problem or from a crash. You could say that was down to bad luck. I guess you could also say it was down to rider skill or equipment choice, but I think that's a good thing that they turn a blind eye there. Why? Well, I've said this many times before, but if you puncture or have a mechanical problem in the first part of a stage in which the peloton is flying along during breakaway formation, full gas, you have no chance, zero, of getting back to the peloton off your own steam. Maybe, if your entire team is sent back, you can get back on, but unless you're a big team leader, that's not going to happen. So if this rule was very strictly applied, we'd see a lot of riders going outside the time limit through no fault of their own. Now, for some reason, it's deemed worse if you do it behind your own team car rather than others, but because of that, teams help each other out by helping riders from rival teams get back to the group they were in after some bad luck. But that is where this incident is different. It wasn't bad luck, it was a choice that was made to get an advantage. A bike with different gear ratio to take on a steep slopes of the final climb. And that, for me, is a big difference. I've said this many times before, but if you make the choice to stop, it's down to you and your teammates to get you back. Maybe you can take a bit of shelter behind other team cars, even that I don't agree with, but you can't just get back on behind your own team car. So I completely agree with the decision in this instance, and Roglič is actually lucky they went with the minimum time sanction. And whilst I'm at it, I'll reiterate my stance on this in hilly time trials too. If you choose to swap your bike because you think it'll give you an advantage, you should not be allowed to have your mechanic push you back up to speed. It's a choice that you and the team have made, so that time trial should be done solely with the power in your legs, not with assistance, however small, along the way. If a rider didn't change bikes, would it be acceptable to see a mechanic hop out during the steepest part and give them a push? Of course not. So why is it all right when you choose to change bikes? End of rant. But let me know what you think. Did the punishment fit the crime, or was Roglič unfairly penalised? Get involved in the comment section below. Back to the race then. For Roglič, the climb to Cuti Negro didn't allow him to land the knockout blow he'd probably hoped for. His team, and especially Lipovic, did a fantastic job in setting him up for an attack, but unlike the previous day, he wasn't really able to push home his advantage. In fact, after opening up a really decent gap from his initial acceleration, Roglič was caught and then dropped by Enric Mas. It wasn't a disaster. He caught him again by the finish, possibly due to his better gear ratios, but it wasn't what he and the team would have expected or hoped for. O'Connor conceded 38 seconds, but take the penalty into account, and that was just 18 seconds, meaning that he takes a 1 minute 3 second advantage over Roglič into the third final week of the race. Never, incidentally, has an Australian led a Grand Tour for more days in succession than Ben O'Connor, who's now held the red jersey for 10 days. Unfortunately for him, it does seem that the writing is on the wall if we look at the second week of racing. So his lead has been slashed by 2 minutes and 50 seconds over the last 6 stages. With 6 more stages to come, including plenty of climbs and an individual time trial on the final day, it does feel like it's Roglic's race to lose. But this is La Vuelta, where nothing is predictable and seemingly anything can happen. Of all the Grand Tours this season, there's never been more to play for going into the final week. This is how the general classification looks. Behind Roglič, Mas is a further 1 minute 20 down in third. Carapaz is another 19 seconds behind that, and Landa is only 21 seconds behind Carapaz, so they're certainly not out of the game either. There's a bigger gap from Landa to Lipovic then in 6th, but between him and Sivakov in 10th, there's only 41 seconds. So there's a lot that could change there too. And it's not just the GC, where there's a lot still to fight for. The youth classification is incredibly tight. Lipovic leads that now, but Rodriguez is breathing down his neck at just 7 seconds, and a resurgent Matthias Skjelmoser is at only 18 seconds. Again, all to play for. And it's the same with the mountains. Van Aert and Vine are now locked together with 46 points each, but Castrillo, who I'll get onto in a minute, is closing in on them with 37 points, and Soler probably doesn't think he's out of the equation either. The two classifications that do seem fairly settled are the teams, in which UAE lead by half an hour, and the points, where Van Aert enjoys a 109-point advantage over Caden Groves. So you should definitely keep your eye on La Vuelta for the next 6 days. There's going to be a lot of exciting racing still. You can catch up on what you've missed, if you've missed any, on Discovery Plus or Max, where indeed you can watch a full season of bike racing both live and on demand. Pablo Castrillo then. What a week it's been for him and Equipo Kern Pharma. Now I did give him a brief mention in our big Vuelta preview because he was 7th overall at the Vuelta a Burgos and has had a very consistent season, but I certainly was not expecting him to take 2 stage wins. Both of them have come from breakaways, the first of which came on stage 12, where he outwitted and outpowered the likes of Narvaez, Soler and Poole to take the biggest win of his career to that point. But it was yesterday's stage that was the most impressive. On what was arguably the hardest climb of this Vuelta, he got the better of 2 of the best climbers in the world. Now admittedly, Sivakov was riding more for GC than for the stage on the day, but nevertheless he's been climbing really well in this race. To get the better of Vlasov though, that was a true indication of how good Castrillo is. The two of them had both been able to sit on Sivakov for most of that final climb, so they didn't get the better of him fair and square. Well, that was some serious power going through the pedals. It might not have been pretty, but it was very, very effective. Groves is also up to 2 stage wins at the race now, but I bet he didn't expect that one to come on Saturday, which was a full-on mountain stage with a first category climb near the end. Admittedly, they weren't the steepest gradients on that climb, but nevertheless, he and Albertson de Koenig rode out of their skins to get the win that day. We all said that this wasn't a race for the sprinters this year, but it just goes to show what's possible when you're climbing as well as Groves. He got the better of Wout van Aert that day, who has also been the Wout van Aert of old at this race. He took a 3rd stage win, this time from a breakaway on day 10, and he's been active almost every single day. If he can win the points and the KOM jersey, he'll be the first to do so at the Vuelta since Jose Maria Jimenez 23 years ago. There was a big win for Jaco Alula on stage 11, Eddie Dunbar taking the biggest win of his career so far, whilst Michael Woods was a very popular winner 2 days later on the Puerta de Ancares. That was the 3rd Vuelta stage of his career. And that wraps things up from a Vuelta point of view with a week remaining. Let me know your predictions down below. I'm going to play it safe and say Roglič for the win, Mas second, and Ben O'Connor hanging on for third, Vine for the mountains, and Skjelmose for the best young rider. In fact, if one of you can correctly predict the final top 10 of La Vuelta in the correct order, I'm going to personally send you this hoodie. Speaking of which, you can buy this very hoodie, great segue, or the t-shirt I'm wearing over at shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com. There are a heap of different designs to choose from over there, and it's also where you're going to find our Spanish-themed GCN Camelback water bottles, which are also available for purchase in limited quantities at this point. They are by far and away the best bottles I've ever used Camelback, so they come highly recommended by me. On to the Renewi Tour then, and I'll start with the final stage because that's freshest in my mind. Going into it, Alex Segar, or Lotto Dstny, was leading by 7 seconds over Magnus Sheffield, courtesy of the Belgians' win in the individual time trial. The final day of that race is generally the hardest though, and so it was always going to be a difficult task to defend that lead, particularly with Tim Wellens at just 16 seconds, a man who'd won that race 3 times before. But it's even harder to defend your lead when one of your teammates is effectively working against you. I would pay good money to know what the team's strategy was before and during that final stage. It was almost like they'd resigned poor Segar to not having the ability to defend his lead and just told him to do what he could to defend himself. Meanwhile, his teammate, Belgian champion Arnaud Delis, was not just following loads of moves, but actively contributing to the pace setting despite his teammate being behind. I don't know about anyone else, but I thought that was a bit bizarre. A, because Segar was in the leader's jersey, and B, because even if Delis was only looking after his own ambitions, surely having the leader of the race behind you as a teammate gives you the perfect excuse to sit on and not work. On this occasion, it kind of paid off for them. Delis took the stage win and Segar held on for second overall behind Wellens, and given that there was 40 seconds between them in the end, it is unlikely he'd have held his overall lead even with the help of Delis. But anyway, I thought their tactics were curious, shall we say. The other 3 stages were all bunt sprints, and in the first 2 of those, Jonathan Milan asserted his pedigree as one of, if not the best sprinter in the world right now. On both occasions, he slipped in between Van der Poel and Philipsen, and on neither occasion could Philipsen get round the Italian stallion. Philipsen did get his stage win on day 4 though, where it looked like Milan just ran out of legs. We didn't really get to see much of Tim Merlier and Dylan Groenewegen in the sprints, mainly because Merlier took Groenewegen out on a really stupid throw to the line on the first of those sprint stages. So Merlier had sort of sat up and stopped pedalling, but then seemed to decide he didn't want Groenewegen to come past, so he veered slightly and then lunged to the line. They had a coming together which resulted in both of them hitting the deck, an incident which left the Dutchman with a broken collarbone, so he of course left the race. Merlier abandoned the race soon after as well. And just a quick word on Per Strand Hageners, who was 3rd overall in that race. His ride on the final day was exceptional. In the break for the whole day, and then still strong enough to hang in with the big guns when they rode across. I'm telling you, that guy is as strong as an ox. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him win one of the big Belgian classics next year. Some transfer updates for you now, and the 2025 Lidl Trek women's squad was completed last week with the signing of Niamh Fisher-Black. The 24-year-old New Zealander won a big stage at the Giro Women's this season and has spent the last few years with SD Works. Lizzie Deignan has also extended with Lidl Trek for 1 more season. Jan Hirt is set to join Israel Premier Tech on a 2-year deal, which I'd say is a blow to Remco Evenepoel if he stays at Soudal Quickstep. I say if, as there are rumours that he's looking to leave that team ahead of his contract ending, with the speculation this year being a move to Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe. Astana have been one of the busiest teams in the transfer market over the last couple of weeks, and their latest recruit is the veteran Italian Diego Ulissi. The 35-year-old has won at least 1 pro race every season since 2010 and will spend the next 2 years with Astana. Sjoerd Baks will also be moving on from UAE Team Emirates. He'll be at Q36.5 next year. Dries van Gestel transfers from Total Energies to Soudal Quickstep, whilst Jaco Alula snapped up 22-year-old Brit Robert Donaldson, who was second at Paris-Roubaix Espoir this year. In other news, Zwift have extended their sponsorship of the Tour de France Femmes for another year, which will take them up to 5 in total. Many people say the race wouldn't have got off the ground in the first place were it not for their backing of it. So well done to Zwift on giving a leg up to the most important race in women's cycling. It's been a resounding success already and will only go from strength to strength, I'm sure. Right then, that is all for this week's Racing News Show. Don't forget to get involved in the Roglič discussion below and let me know your top 10 predictions for La Vuelta. I'll see you next week.